Ripper. Noun. A tool that is used to tear or break something. Alternative meaning. A murderer who mutilates victims' bodies. The Gainesville Ripper, the Atlanta Ripper, the Yorkshire Ripper, the Camden Ripper, Joel the Ripper, and the most famous, Jack the Ripper. This word is used to describe some of the world's most infamous and depraved serial murderers, and in the case of the Chicago Ripper crew, it describes not one, but 4 depraved individuals who mutilated, cannibalized, and desecrated their victims for their own ritual and pleasure. Due to the graphic nature of this program, listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Ritualistic Podcast. I'm your host Dave, and things are about to get ritualistic.
They use blood in their rituals.
Late October 1982, 20-year-old sex worker Beverly Washington was approached by a slim white man with greasy hair and a mustache, driving a red van with tinted windows. He seemed nervous and offered her much more money than she was asking. Neither of them knew that this interaction would be the beginning of the end for the sadistic group who would become known as the Chicago Ripper Crew. Beverly Washington, despite her injuries, was able to give a great description of the man who attacked her. She described him as a slim white man with greasy hair and a mustache, around 25 years of age, wearing a flannel shirt and square-toed shoes. He offered her much more than she was asking for, and he seemed nervous for some reason. She went on to describe how she got into his red van with the feather and roach clip hanging from the rearview mirror, and when she did, he pulled a gun on her and forced her through the wooden door dividing the van front to back. As she went through, she was ordered to remove her clothing. He then handcuffed her to the van and forced her to give him oral sex. He then gave her a handful of pills which she did not want to take. As she refused, he told her that if she did not take them, he would get violent, so she complied. And soon after, she began to fade out of consciousness, and as she did, she saw him holding a garrote over her and feared she would die at his hands. 3 weeks later, Detective Thomas Flynn pulled over a red Dodge van matching the description Beverly gave. However, the driver did not match the description. When he was questioned, he told police his name was Eddie Spritzer. He was asked if it was his van. He said it was not his but his boss's van, that his boss's name was Robin Gecht. The officers followed Spritzer to Gecht's home, where Gecht provided the registration documents. The police saw Gecht, and they knew they had their man, as his appearance matched Beverly's description exactly, right down to his clothing style and shoes. Gecht was cooperative with police and answered their questions, but the officers didn't have much to go on, so they left. Beverly Washington was able to identify Gecht from a photo lineup, and this gave police reason to go back and question him again. However, this time, Gecht had a lawyer and would not cooperate. Born January 5th, 1961 to teen mother Judith, Edward was treated poorly by his father because his father considered him slow. Edward had to repeat kindergarten because he was shy, withdrawn, and not mature enough to continue to first grade. Spritzer was not a great performer at school, being in the same grade as his younger sister Jennifer. He was described by classmates as slow, weird, and uncoordinated. At age 12, his mother remarried, and whilst his stepfather was stern, he treated Edward with compassion. Spritzer was kicked out of his mother and stepfather's house at age 18 after a car accident, and went through menial jobs before taking a job with Robin Gecht at his electrical contracting business. Spritzer was just 23 when arrested. In questioning, he was not cooperating at first, but soon began to break down. Edward was afraid of Gecht, believing that Gecht had powers over him. On November 5, 1982, in an interview with Detective Thomas Flynn and Cook County Assistant State's Attorney Richard Buke, Spritzer broke down and went on to make a full 78-page confession to the crimes. Police were then able to retain warrants for Robin Gecht, Andrew Kokoralis, and Thomas Kokoralis. Spritzer was found guilty of the murders of Linda Sutton, Shuey Mack, Sandra Delaware, Rosebeck Davis, and Raphael Tirado, and was sentenced to death. Edward Spritzer was initially represented by DuPage County Public Defender Frank Wesolowski. However, Frank Weslowski assigned the case to Assistant Public Defender Edward Ward, who on June 4, 1985 advised the court that he had resigned as public defender but remained representative of Spreitzer until June 18, 1985, when Weslowski informed the court that Spreitzer's defence would be assigned to Carol Ann Finson. Carol Ann Finson was officially appointed as Spreitzer's defender on September 23, 1985, after Ward withdrew from the case. However, Ward's replacement as Assistant Public Defender was Peter Dockery, who by 1986 had become appointed to the position of DuPage County Public Defender, which later would be the basis of an appeal by Spreitzer, as Dockery was involved in the decision to charge Spreitzer with the murder of Linda Sutton, which Spreitzer claims he was deprived of effective assistant counsel by a conflict of interest. This appeal was not successful, and Spreitzer's death sentence remained. However, Spreitzer's sentence was commuted to life by then Illinois Governor George H. Ryan, who commuted all death sentences in 2003 in the last days before leaving office. Spreitzer is currently serving life in prison at Pontiac Correctional Center and is not eligible for parole. Brothers Andrew and Thomas Kokoralis were raised in an Orthodox Greek home. Andrew was born on July 18, 1961, and Thomas on July 10, 1960. Thomas and Andrew lived at the Rip Van Winkle Motel, not far from the Brer Rabbit Motel. They had adjoining rooms where the men, including Gecht and Spreitzer, would party and perform some of their rituals. The police had learned of this when investigating Gecht and interviewed the motel manager, who remembered Gecht as one of the men whom he said were noisy and believed they were some kind of cultists. Luckily for the investigating officers, the Kokoralis brothers had left a forwarding address for their mail, and with this, the police were able to track them down. They found Thomas at home and asked him a few questions, and as he was unable to answer them consistently, he was taken in for further interrogation. Thomas was questioned and given a polygraph test which he failed, before cracking and describing the rituals the men performed, and admitting to murdering Lori Ann Borowski with his brother Andrew when he saw her photograph. Thomas Kokoralis was charged with the murder of Lori Ann Borowski on November 12, 1982, and indicted by grand jury on November 16th. He attempted to block his confession from being submitted to the court in his trial. However, this was denied, and in 1984, Thomas was sentenced to 70 years in prison for the murder of Lori Ann Borowski. In 2017, Thomas was up for parole, as he had served half of his 70-year sentence he received. As of this recording, he is still behind bars due to public outrage, petitions by the family of Lori Ann Borowski, and because he does not have an approved place to live if released. Kokoralis is currently serving his sentence in Illinois River Correctional Center and has a projected discharge date of September 30, 2020. Andrew Kokoralis was arrested on November 5, 1982. When his apartment was searched, the police located satanic literature, among other items, and was formally charged with the rape and murder of Rose Beck Davis on November 14th. Andrew faced trials in 2 counties, the first being for the murder of Rose Beck Davis. Andrew had admitted to the murder, and in his confession described how the men had forced her into the van, beaten her with a hatchet, and then dumped her body. After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict and sentenced him to life in prison. The second trial saw Kokoralis recant his confession, saying that police had instructed him on what to say, and that they made promises to him and beat him until he confessed. The prosecution questioned him about all 6 interrogations to different officers, and he maintained that the confession was false. Detective Warren Wilcox testified that when shown a photo lineup, that Kokoralis had picked out the photo of Lori Ann Borowski and said, "That's the girl Eddie and I killed in the cemetery." After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of her murder and sentenced him to death. During sentencing, the defense took the stance that the murder did not warrant the death penalty, citing the previous murder conviction for the murder of Rose Beck Davis. In addition to ineffective assistance of counsel, his prison chaplain and also a counsellor testified that he was non-threatening and could be rehabilitated. His sentence was upheld in 1989 after a panel of judges dismissed an appeal. On further appeal, Kokorala's defense took the tactic that he was suffering from schizophrenia, and that he did not know what he was doing when committing the murders, and claimed that his trial lawyers had failed and should have entered an insanity defense and had him evaluated, and also argued that his trial judge should have had him evaluated but failed to do so, and as such, this was significant oversight. The court issued a 41-page opinion that, in short, found no reversible error and affirmed the death sentence. During the 1990s, a number of inmates on death row in Illinois were exonerated by DNA evidence, which had an effect on then-Governor George H. Ryan, who commuted a number of death sentences, including that of Edward Spreitzer, to life sentences. On March 17, 1999, Andrew Kokorala, still hopeful of having his death sentence commuted at the 11th hour, was flown to the Supermax prison in Tams, Illinois. He spent the rest of the day fasting, talking to friends and family on the phone, and prayed and cried with his brother Thomas. As he lay strapped to the gurney, awaiting lethal injection, he issued an apology to the family of Lorianne Borowski, before at 12:34 p.m. on March 17, 1999, becoming the last person to be put to death in the state of Illinois. By the year 2000, more men had been put onto the list of those who should have never been sentenced to death, and a moratorium on the death penalty was put in place. In January 2003, in a final act before leaving office, Governor Ryan pardoned 4 inmates and granted clemency to 100 plus more on Illinois death row, commuting sentences to life in prison. The moratorium on the death penalty remained in place until the death penalty was formally abolished in Illinois, and the sentences of the final 15 men on death row were commuted to life by Governor Pat Quinn on March 9, 2011. Born on November 30, 1953, Gecht had a troubled life and an obsession with making girlfriends and his wife cut or stab their breasts and nipples during sex, with his wife allegedly forced to endure infected wounds. Gecht was arrested on November 5, 1982, and charged with the assault of Washington and suspected rape and slashing of Angel York and Cynthia Smith. In court documents, Eddie Spreitzer had confessed to being with Gecht when Rafael Tirado was murdered and Alberto Rosario was wounded. Quote, Rafael Tirado and Alberto Rosario, they were both shot on October 6, 1982, while standing near the corner of Damon and Lemoyne in Chicago. Rosario was taken to the hospital and survived. Tirado, shot once in the head and once in the neck, died from the wounds. According to the defendant, on October 6, 1982, the defendant was driving in the van with Gecht near North Avenue and Damon Street when they saw 3 men near a phone booth. Gecht told the defendant, who was driving, to slow down. Gecht then took a .38 caliber pistol and a rifle from the rear of the van and told the defendant to stop. Gecht then fired several shots with the pistol and the rifle and told the defendant to drive away. Gecht was sentenced to concurrent sentences of 30 years for aggravated kidnapping, 60 years for deviant sexual assault, and 60 years for rape, and a consecutive term of 60 years for attempted murder. In 1991, Gecht petitioned for post-conviction DNA testing, which was eventually denied in 1997, with the opinion stating that it would have no impact on the defendant's guilt. Gecht is currently serving his sentence in Menard Correctional Center and has a projected parole date of December 13, 2042, at which time he will be 89 years old. John Wayne Gacy ran PDM contractors performing repair work, sign writing, concreting, interior design and landscaping, among other things. The story goes that in the 70s, Robin Gecht worked for the notorious serial murderer who murdered 33 men and hid the bodies in the crawl space of his Chicago home. Gecht has allegedly made the statement to the effect of, the mistake Gacy made was not murder, but keeping the bodies, that he would have done it differently. I've been unable to confirm this. I've read excerpts of letters supposedly from Gecht stating that he did not know Gacy. I've also read that it was spin put out by the police on the case. However, it has also been thought that Gacy had an accomplice or accomplices, with the victim reportedly stating that he felt there was another person in the room as he was being attacked by Gacy. And although this has never been proven, it could be where Gecht got a taste for murder and rape, if he was one of the supposed accomplices. 4 men kneel before an altar, draped with a red cloth, adorned with candles and a plate with the flesh of a woman's breast sitting atop like a sacrifice to Satan. In the name of Satan, the ruler of earth, the king of the world, I command the forces of darkness to bestow their infernal upon me. Surrounded by upside-down crosses painted on the attic walls, the men read chapters from the Satanic Bible. Open wide the gates of hell and come forth from the abyss to greet me as your brother and friend. The men take turns to masturbate onto the flesh before cutting into four and eating the flesh in a sadistic satanic ritual. I have taken that name as part of myself. I live as the beasts of the field. Rejoicing in the fleshly life, I favour the just and curse the rotten. By all the gods of the pit, I command that these things which I speak shall come to pass. With the human flesh being the breasts of the murder victims that they had mutilated, one can surmise that these rituals made the men feel powerful, believing they were invoking Satan's power for their own wants and needs. This ritual was a regular one for the men. They would wait for Geck's wife to go to work and then climb up into the attic of Geck's home at 2163 North McVicker Avenue in the Belmont-Cragen area of Chicago and perform the rituals. Thomas Kokoralis confessed to once seeing a box with as many as 15 amputated breasts in it, and to partaking in around a dozen of these rituals with other men. The men also used this chapel in some of their murders, taking some of the women they abducted to the attic chapel where they were mutilated, raped, and murdered. This is not the only place the men took abducted women or performed their rituals, with the men having rented adjoining rooms at the Rip Van Winkle Motel in Villa Park, and regularly taking the women there to rape, murder, and torture. David Gecht, born August 11, 1980, is Robin Gecht's son, and it seems as though murder runs in the family. David Gecht is currently serving a sentence for first-degree murder in Pontiac Correctional Center. Gecht was a member of the Insane Unknown street gang, and on January 29, 1999, murdered Roberto Cruz, a Spanish Lords gang member, outside Bristol's nightclub in Chicago. David Gecht will be up for parole in 2044. Thank you for listening. This case was a real eye-opener. Many details were hard to find, but I did my best to bring the details about the victims into episode 1. Heading into holidays and the new year, I will be releasing a number of mini episodes before taking time off to write season 2. I'm hopeful season 2 will be a step up in research and writing, and I'll be taking a different approach to season 2, and that will be revealed soon. If you wish to stay up to date with the podcast, please subscribe to us on your favourite podcast app and follow us on social media at RitualisticPod or search Ritualistic Podcast. If you wish to send through constructive feedback, corrections, or make a show suggestion, please email ritualisticpod@gmail.com. I'm Dave. This has been Ritualistic Podcast. Stay awesome, stay safe, and see you next time.